tonight we are going to be working in pan pastels and colored pencil. I'm working on Can't Send Me 10s. You've got this bunny. Reference photo is over at my website if you want to draw along with me. I'm going to be doing my base layers with pan pastel, and then I'll go on top of that with detail and colored pencil. Pan pastels I'm going to be using, this is the, 20 set, I believe? Yeah, 20. And you can mix your colors very, very much like we do with paint. So if you're looking at all the huge selection of colors available, don't feel like you have to have every single one. You'll see as I'm going to do tonight, we can mix a lot. What I will be using are the soft tools. These are the SOFFT little guys, and they have the sponge covers, and this is what I will be mixing my colors with. The colors I'm going to be using for the pan pastels are the phthalo blue and phthalo green. I'm going to mix these two colors together because that is going to give me a teal tone, and definitely going to be adding white. So I'm just going to use this tool. Let's pull this so you can see the palette a little bit better. Now you can see mine are a mess. They're about as messy as my watercolor pans, which I'm sure drives people crazy. But I'm just going to mix right on there. So I'm just going to mix those where I want them. I think a little bit more blue. And then coming over to the easel, let's see what color that looks like. Yep, that's pretty much exactly what I wanted. So we are good. And I'm going to fill this out. Now I drew everything out first with my colored pencils, and see how as I work over this, you really can't, you can still see the white whiskers. So you're not going to erase those by going over them. See how nicely they stay in place? And if some of this, like you can see a little bit is more of the blue, some of it has more of the green, that's okay. I'm not trying to make that one complete solid color. Variation is just fine. So same thing, just gonna grab some of both of these. And back over to the easel. Now I would rather you overlap onto the bunny than go outside of him. Like let's say here. See how I've got an area, if I work this, I've got a gap because a lot of people are too afraid to get the background color over the subject. And so they'll leave this halo effect where you've got a line where it shouldn't be. Go right over the bunny if you need to. I can still see the lines there. You don't want that halo effect though. Now I don't mean making something intentionally lighter around the subject. That can look really cool, that glow effect. But that's, I guess, a different type of halo effect. But in this case, we don't want to leave a gap of just the paper blank showing. And we're gonna go right around that. See this mixture, the one I just did had a little bit more green, so it's got this gorgeous teal color in with it. So I'm just getting a really pretty soft transition from areas that have more blue, more white. Now, if you do not have pan pastels, you can just skip this and go straight when we start in with the colored pencil. Now I'm filling up higher, but the matte would actually cover a large portion of this, but I would rather fill too much than not quite enough. So that's how the matte, actually probably more like that is how the matte would hit. So up here really isn't gonna show, but it's better to fill in more than you need than have to go back later and fix it because you didn't quite have enough. That one has a little bit too much green. I know I said I wanted variation, but that's a little too much. Now, I like these a lot better than the smaller like blush applicator makeup type tools for applying it because you've got a lot more control. It's just much, much more comfortable to hold it. I've also tried using paint brushes to apply pan pastels. It does not work like at all. I've had people say, yeah, it does. No, it doesn't. Try these. You'll know what I mean by it doesn't work. Like the difference is pretty huge. Usually when you use a paintbrush, you end up knocking more of the product off the paper than what sticks. So you're just wasting a ton of it. Now, I think I'm going to lighten just a little bit right in here, but I want to make sure that pulls and blends out. And just layer right on top of the paper. Yeah, that color is actually coming out really accurate. I'm surprised. Usually teals, it does not want to look right, but that looks pretty dang close. Like, I'm impressed. Now see how I'm getting some harsher lines in there? All I'm gonna do is take my paper towel. These are Viva paper towels, so it's very cloth-like. If you don't have this, an old t-shirt would be a good alternative. I'm gonna wipe some of this off so that this is more clean. And now I'm just gonna smudge that, soften that out. So I'm pretty much just taking a dry sponge that doesn't have a lot of product on it, and that's gonna give me that nice, soft look so I don't have those harsher start and stop points, that streakiness that I was getting. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and start filling in the bunny. Now, I am going to use a combination of the color that I just did and white for the shadows for that. So let's actually, and then I'll put white on top and then come back with more teal as needed. Basically what I'm doing right now is just cleaning my brush on the paper. Now, whatever color you go with on your background, that's the color you want to do for the shadows on the bunny. So let's say you went with like a pale purple color. Then you would use that same pale purple for the shadows on the white. White is very reflective. It's going to pick up what's around it. And that's a mistake a lot of people make, or a challenge a lot of people have when they are working with white fur is, remember, white is not true white. Like in this case, this bunny's actually pretty overexposed. So he's very white in a lot of areas, but not everywhere. Look at how many of the darker shadowed areas we've got. Like right in here. I'm gonna pull more of that dark in this area. Now this photo came from Unsplash, and the original, there's like some guy's leg in it, and it was kind of a weird photo. They're looking down on him. He's on the floor indoors, like by a couch. This is an example of what you can do with pet portraits. If somebody has a photo like that that's not super amazing, but you can turn it into something that it feels more artsy. So let's go ahead. I think I've probably wiped enough of this off now, going lightly over this. Let's start pulling in some of the white. I've got plenty of, you can see this, my palette has lots of the blue in it, so some of that's gonna pick up anyway, which is fine. Now this guy's really, really soft, so I'm not gonna be putting a lot of individual brush marks in the white area. That's gonna help his coat seem more dense and soft. I mean, I'll obviously be putting some, but not a ton. If you put too many brush strokes on fur that you want to look really soft, you end up making it look wiry. I always think of zombie hair, like it's not been washed in a while. Turns out it's hard to get zombies to wash their hair. So it's just that dirty, greasy look, like if you try to put too much detail into fur that should look fluffy. I'm going to be careful around that edge. I don't really want to layer that into the background here because I can use my pencil for that later. It would be easier. And we're just going to fill that guy in. He already looks so cute, and like I want to pet him. How many of you guys have bunnies as pets? Now notice even here, look how where the fur, that line is right there, that was done with my polychromos, and when I blend over it, it stays. So if you draw out your lines in colored pencil, when you blend over, you can be really sloppy, you can do a lot of blending like I'm doing here, and it's not gonna mess up your art or your line drawing, so you're not gonna miss that. I'm just gonna turn the brush to the side here to get this thin light area. And then of course we've got the inside of the ear. And you can follow along with any medium. Really, you're just paying attention to where are your lights and where are your darks. If you can get your values in there right, it'll look about the same with most mediums. I've heard several people, it always makes me laugh, comment about why are you trying to make your oil paints look like acrylics, or your acrylics look like oils, or your colored pencil look like acrylics, just use acrylics then, or whatever. Like a lot of people feel like a certain medium should look a specific way. No, in my mind, and you can do however you want, it's art, that you're free. But I really do believe that art it doesn't matter what medium I'm working in. That shouldn't be a difference. It should have my style, the way that I do my lights and darks, the way that I draw things out. It should have me in there, not the medium. The medium is not what defines me. It's the artwork, how that comes out. And again, it doesn't matter what medium I work in. It should pretty much be the same all the way through. Okay, I'm gonna pull, let's get some pinks in there. So I'm gonna use a little bit of this reddish brown, a little bit of pink, a little bit of white. I don't want too much pink. Ooh, that's pink. Let's dab some of that off on my paper towel. There we go, that's a much softer look. You know, a lot of people will define themselves and their art by the medium. I don't do that. I define it by the art. The medium is just a tool. I'm going to grab this soft tool with the triangle point. I actually prefer this to, I just tossed it, these ones for fine detail. I can get smaller detail because of that point. Actually, there we go. Now you can see that point is going to give me finer detail even though overall it's larger. And now I'm going to come through with brown. Now, notice I don't have a good rich chocolate brown in this color set. So all I do is mix my red oxide or burnt sienna, whichever color that is, and some black. And that will give me a really nice chocolate brown, like really nice. I don't even have this color, but look how I can mix it. And this is the color I think I'm going to do for a lot of the base. Actually, the brown might be better for some of the base. So I change my mind constantly. I think a lot of people think that as artists that we know going in exactly what everything's going to look like. Heck no, I'm making that up as I go along. I'm changing my mind constantly on what I think will be easier. I'll clean this eye up and define everything once I go on with my pencils. So I'm going to take this, we've got those dark areas in. This brown is a much softer, kind of a neutral, medium brown. Let's go ahead and pull some of that guy in here. It really doesn't matter which brown you go with, honestly. It's an issue of values. Are your darks dark enough, your lights light enough? As always, that is what's going to make your work look realistic. So if you're having a hard time with your work, you're looking in, you're like, it always looks cartoony. It just doesn't look super realistic, even though I put all the detail in, even though my foundation drawing was right, but it still looks cartoony. It's probably because your values aren't there. Your darks aren't dark enough. Your lights aren't light enough. And this is the smooth side of the Canson Me-10s. I've worked on both sides when doing this, but I'm really starting to like the smooth side better, even with pan pastels. In the past, I went with the rough side so that it stuck better. But it turns out these pastels stick so well to both sides. Yeah, it's gonna stick more to the rough side. But because, you know, balancing things out so that your detail, you can still get really smooth detail with a colored pencil, knowing I'm going to be going over with that. I've been leaning more towards doing the, I can't multitask, my brain keeps shutting down. Words are hard. But I've been leaning more into the soft side and really liking the effects that I've gotten. This is why I am in love with pan pastels. Look how fast I just got my entire base layer in there of almost everything. I don't care if these spots are exact. Same thing when I start with the pattern on his face. I don't care if it's exact, but let's say you're doing a pet portrait for somebody. If you're doing someone's cat or someone's bunny, the markings need to be exact. Don't take artistic liberties there. I've told this story a few times, but there were several years ago, there was an Italian Greyhound forum I was on, and there was a girl that did a portrait of one of the Italian Greyhounds who was like well known, like this, the owner posted all the time, so everyone knew who this dog was. And she was really interesting, pied with blue spots and white spots, kind of like a blue and white cow print. Super cute. Her name was Eloise. But the artist took a few too many artistic liberties on which side she mirrored it, so the spots were on the wrong side. And the owner, when she gave it to her, the owner was talking to me and she's like, what am I supposed to do with this? That's not my dog. Make sure when you do portraits, if it's of somebody's animal, do not take artistic liberties on where the spots go. Here, no one's gonna know the difference because I don't know who this bunny belongs to. Again, this reference photo came from Unsplash. You can find tons of photos on Unsplash and Pixabay that are royalty free that you can use in your own artwork, even to sell, make prints. You don't have to worry about that. You don't want to just go and find random photos on Google. That many of those, most of those, I mean, assume if it doesn't say that it's royalty free, it is, somebody owns the copyright to that. So you could get in trouble doing it in your artwork. And I know people will always argue and say, oh no, it's just inspiration. Well, does it look like the photo? If so, if it can be identified as such, you do not want to take somebody's photo. Especially in this case, we've got Unsplash and Pixabay. There's plenty of royalty free stuff. Or wildlifereferencephotos.com is a great place to get reference photos. Or my Patreon. I give out, if you're on the $4 tier, it's 5 free animal or flower reference photos a month. If you're on the higher tiers, it's 10. So you don't need to just go steal stuff off the internet. It is so easy to find things that you can legally use and not even have to worry about being sued for violating somebody's copyright. And you may think there's a lot of people out there who will say things like, well, as long as you change 30% of it, it's fine. No, it's not. That's not how it works. That's not a thing. If it's at all identifiable as the original photo or the original artwork that you copied, you could get in a lot of trouble. So why even mess with it? Like, why press, oh, I think I can get away? Why? There's legal, great photos available for you that you can use in your work. So I would definitely avoid taking something in yours. I mean, I would avoid that anyway, but maybe I can scare some people into not doing it. Don't be a thief. I'm going to take that same brown and do some of the shading with this. Actually, I'm going to switch brushes though. This one's a little bit too harsh. So let's take some of that. Get this under the bunny's chin. Now, if I go over with the colored pencil and I decide I want to soften more out with the pan pastels, I can do that. This isn't like when I work with watercolor that you wouldn't want to put watercolor back over colored pencils. So here I can go back and forth. It's not a problem. I'm making this a little bit darker so that when I come on top with the white pencil, it'll show up better. Dude, I want to put the black, I guess I may as well put some of the black in now. I'll still have to go over it with colored pencil to get it as dark as I want, but we can put a little in. And then just pulling a bit through here. This is what I'm talking about. If you're doing a pet portrait that is somebody's animal, make sure these black areas would need to be in the exact right spot. Mine don't need to be, so I'm not going to spend too much time perfecting those. That's not going to make it any better in this case. But if it's somebody's actual animal, then it matters. Darken that up a bit. I don't want to go too crazy because I do want some of those lights will show through on the later stage. Of course, we've got a lot of the dark in here. And notice how I'm holding this to the side. I'm twisting it to get thinner lines instead of the thick ones. It's very similar to using a palette knife. We've not done a painting with a palette knife in a really long time. Let me know if you'd like one of those for one of the live streams. They use a lot of paint, but man, are they fun. Okay, I'm gonna call that good with the pan pastels, and I think I'm gonna switch over then. Actually, I take it back. I do wanna get a little bit more of an orangey color, just a little in some of the brown. Probably isn't going to make that big of a difference in the end, but I've decided I wanted it there. I need to mist this with my Spectrafix before I move on. So Okay, I say you need to. I'm going to. It's going to help mine to be more archival, to last long term. But if you don't have any of this on you, don't worry too much about it. You're probably still fine. This is going to help seal the pan pastels down so it lasts. It's more like long term. There's going to be less likely of this like falling off the paper over time. So that's the thing with pastels. Over the years, they do just kind of fall. Like if you mat it, you'll see little dust of the pastel that will fall off of it, especially if you do not use some sort of a fixative. So this is what I'm using. This is Spectrafix, and I have it in a fine mist sprayer. And I'm going to hold this out at a distance and just lightly go over it. Not too much. If you go too heavy, you will create heavy, heavy droplets, and that's not what I'm looking for. I'm also going to take a hairdryer and dry that to speed things along, but just a light mist is all you need. And if any of these leave heavier droplets, just take your blending tool and blend right over it. So if it does leave a heavy droplet, it's not the end of the world. You can fix it. Just blend over it and then do it again. But the fine mist sprayer will help that not to happen as much. Although I will say, I think mine is clogging because that came out weird, like it felt. No, yeah, I think it was just clogged. So anyway, that is the product I used to spray that. And now I'm going to put the paper back over here. And let's start with his little eye. We've got that curve, and he's got the white of his eye exposed, and then black on the outer edge. And the reason I'm going with polychromos here is that it's going to hold a sharper point. Because it's a harder lead, I can push harder. I can also sharpen the pencil to a finer point. So for something like this, where I want really clean edges, it's definitely the way to go. And I am burnishing. I'm pushing pretty hard here because I'm not going to be putting a bunch of layers over this. If I knew I needed to blend and do a lot of layering over, I would want to go with lighter layers so that I didn't damage the tooth of the paper. But here, that's unnecessary. So I am pushing quite a bit harder. Now really look at the details on your reference photo. We've got the little eyelids. We really want to make sure that we're capturing all of that. All these little lines. We're going to pull that pupil way out. Look at the shadow here, round this off. And we're going to start making that eye look very three-dimensional. This dark up here is going to be cast from that upper lid, or a shadow cast from the upper lid, so get that in there. I'm going to thin this out, this line here, by pulling the black in on either side. Now, right now, the brown of his eye is a little bit too light, so I'll lightly go over that. And I'm going to go ahead and get that highlight in. This is where I couldn't make up my mind. I think if I go with a darker blue, because I already had it out, and then put light on top, that'll give me a good result. But I want blue right on the edge of the highlight. And then we'll blend the white over it. I'm using the white polychromo so it's not too opaque. I'll use my other ones where I want it to be more opaque, but not here. I want that glassy look. I'm going to take a brown and just go right in between the black and the brown, or the iris and the shadow of the black on the side there. So this area and this area, I'm bringing them together. Wow, that was weirdly hard to communicate. He's got a really big pupil. Kind of like an owl there. And then round this, make sure this is nice and round. Mine's a little bit choppy there, so I'm going to smooth this out. Really get that circle in there. Okay, he's already so cute with just putting his eye in. And I'm just going to make the little lines going the same direction as the fur. Really watch this, that is going the right direction. These are not just random confetti lines all over the place. You just start putting random lines in, it is not going to look cute. I don't need every line to be exact. Close is close enough, but they do need to be close. Like, don't just make them up. You want to spend more time looking at your reference photo than you do your actual artwork. A lot of people make the mistake. They look at the reference photo and then they just go to town on the artwork without looking at the reference photo again, going by memory. Yeah, it's not going to come out looking very good that way. Spend more time just constantly glancing at that photo. I'm pushing pretty hard to get these lines to really show up. And again, still using the polychromos white versus one of my more opaque whites because I want the thinner line that this gives me. And I'm not trying to make it super opaque, so that also adds to that choice. Now notice the fur marks, how they start going in almost rows. Now don't make straight lines. You're not trying to make little like man-made fences, but see how we get a row and then another row. That is a big deal on the fur. And if you're following along, if you're doing the group challenge over on Patreon for this month, we're doing a landscape. And I showed you in that one, this is what I'm talking about, those rows. It's the same thing with fur as it is in the landscape, where you get these sorts of rows in the fur, or in the case of the landscape, in the grass, or even the clouds. So now I'm using the brown. I don't want to just use black for everything. I want to make sure I keep that for some of those darkest darks. Now I'm going to grab my more opaque white here. I want to pull a little bit higher with this, and this one is going to show up more. This is my my Derwent Light Fast. That is going to be a bit more opaque than the polychromos. We're going to break that up a little bit. Again, if yours is not perfect, don't worry about it. It does not need to be exact to still look awesome. Unless you're doing somebody's pet, then you need to be more exact. There are exceptions to everything. I need a peach type color. Do I have one? Oh, what are you? You may be close. This one is sanguine. Kinda. That actually would work. Yep, that works. So this is a really good point. The color that, if I wanted to be more exact, would be more of a pink tone. I don't need it to be exact, but I do need my values about right. This works. This is close enough. It's kind of an orangey tone, but it absolutely works for what I needed. We get so caught up worried about the exact perfect color. The color is not what is going to make the work look more realistic. It's the values. Are your lights light enough? Your darks dark enough? And of course, have an accurate drawing to start with. That also helps. Well, I've got this more opaque white, I can use that, push a little bit harder on the really bright white area. And every time I'm pausing and nothing is happening, it's because I keep looking at that reference photo. Oops, and then I'm going to throw my pencil. You tried to escape. I'm not pushing that hard, you don't need to run away. And let's just quickly go through here and start getting these marks. I'm going to come through. We've got a line here that's really dark, that deeper shadow in between the clumps of really dense fur. Again, it moves in rows. Not straight lines, though. There is a difference. Few little speckles of the really dark in between where I've got the white and the brown. Another definite row here. Also, these lines are not perfectly straight. Every single little line I'm making is at least slightly curved. It has a much more natural feel. There's not a lot in nature that's going to be completely straight. Straight are your more man-made stuff, buildings and fences and cars and stuff. But when you get into wildlife or nature landscapes, everything, even like tree trunks, are usually at least slightly curved and bent. So you get a much more natural feel with that, just slight curve. When you do a bunch of perfectly straight lines, you end up with something that has a very stiff feel to it. Not very natural. Yeah, the fur marks, how here they're going back this way, here it starts to curve around. Really watch that direction. This will make such a difference in your artwork. It doesn't even matter that the technique is perfect. It doesn't matter if everything's perfectly smooth. But if you can get that where you're really capturing the feel there, it will make such a difference in what your work looks like. We often get really hung up on the perfect technique, the perfect blending, the perfect everything. And in the end, most viewers aren't that impressed by that. What they're looking at, your values, your contrast, your things like this, is the fur going in the right direction? Focus more on those. Don't worry so much about getting and learning the perfect blending technique. I mean, we want to add that in too, obviously. We'd like to learn how to do everything well, but they're not nearly as important as how much value we put on those things. The average viewer cares about the idea you had in your painting, and they're drawn to having really good contrast, your lights and your darks, a good design. We tend to focus on the wrong thing and just get so worked up on that we lose sight of the big picture. Here we've got a lot of little short ones, so I'm just going to go a little bit softer. And now here, this is going to be one where the ear is a bit more velvety, the short fur. Let that grainy, gritty look you get of the paper that I often avoid. This is a case where I want to leave that. It makes that look really short, very velvety type fur. We've got dark right around the edge there. A little bit moving in. I'm going to need to move my paper in. Now, once we get through the head and the ears, the rest goes very, very quickly. The majority of the work and the majority of the detail is being done right around the head. That's where we really want to focus our detail. That will help keep the viewer's attention in this area. And then we'll just soften out and calm that detail down as we move away from the face. It's really dark in here, so I can fill that in. I'm doing burnishing. I'm pushing harder. I'm just going to go right over this dark area. Again, if it's a little bit grainy and gritty, that's perfect for this look. Use that to your advantage. I think of it almost like dry brushing with acrylics. You often hear me talk about how much I dislike that technique. It just doesn't look good. See, this is kind of that same feel with colored pencil. But sometimes dry brushing looks good, and sometimes the same with your colored pencils, and this is one of them. So I'm going to take my white. I'm using the polychromos again, so it's not as opaque. That gives me a softer look. I'm also going to pull a bunch of those little ones in between what I did here. This area is a lot darker than what I've got. I actually want to go get my pan pastels and fix that. It'll be easier than doing it with, oh, actually, let me see. Maybe I want to put more of them. Pan pastels would be faster, but, oh, I like that color. Fine, I'll just do this. Pan pastels would be like one swipe and done. I am going to use a bit of OMS to blend this out. Actually, I'm going to pull a couple other colors over that. What else do I have out right now? Ooh, this one's perfect. This gives me that purpley color. This is light aubergine, I don't know. I can't say words. That one is Caran d'Ache Luminance. Just a bit more purpley. And then we've got this light area that comes through here. Actually, you know what? I don't even need, I'm trying to avoid using OMS because the dry time slows me down for getting something like this done. But look how nice that blended. I'm just gonna lightly go over it and burnish then with the white. You also have some colorless blenders that can work okay. They work, actually, believe it or not, I don't say this often, but it's one of the things I actually like better with Prismacolor, their colorless blender. I liked better than the Caran d'Ache. It's okay, but let me see if I've got one over here. Oh, I have the Lyra Rembrandt Splendor. That is working just fine. There we go. We're going to use that tonight. So this one is, I don't have that in the video description, I'm going to need to add it, but the Lyra Rembrandt Splendor, so it's one of the tools you can use that's kind of like a colorless blender sort of thing. And they've got the Splendor and then another one. One of them's harder than the other, and it's been so many years since I used them, I don't remember which one was which. I should probably do a review video on those. I don't even think I have. And I'm just lightly going over that. You could do white, it'll just lighten it up if you add white for burnishing. But that worked out a lot better than I thought it would. Okay, I want to soften the transition here with white. I'm going to move my pencil back and forth this way so I get that rounded look of the ear, where those lines are. Now we're going to come back through and start putting some little hairs in. Actually, switch over to my Polychromos white. That one is going to be a little bit more translucent, but harder lead, smaller details. Works well for this. That white was standing out a bit too much for the hairs I wanted to create in here. So I'll just switch that over. Bunch of little hairs, and I'll come back through with the black as well, but let's get, while I've got this color in my hand, we can go ahead and throw some of the little guys in here. Okay, got the black now. Let's come in between little teeny guys, little details. Notice that the ear takes longer than the eye, and the eye is like your main focus. That is always the case when doing portraits. I will usually start with the ear because it takes so long, and I'll end up wanting to rush through it otherwise. In many cases, especially like a rose ear and a dog, like an Italian Greyhound or a Greyhound, that fold is just so much work. So I will often do that first just to get it out of the way so I don't rush later. That looks really cute. Let's go ahead and... This ear is not as in focus, and it's much softer, shorter fur back here. So I'm just gonna create this blotchy look. I can see where I did not do a good job cropping. If you've got this reference photo, there's like this pink blotch there. Yeah, put black over that. That's just a bad crop job on my part. Bad Photoshop. You do not have to be good at Photoshop, and I just got... I want to fix this now. I got a little bit of black smudge right there. I'll go over it with the Pan Pastel again later. But look at the side of my hand, has color on it. Watch that. I was starting to touch that, or I must have just brushed against it, and that left a mark. Now it's easy to fix, but it is something I will have to go back and fix later. So make sure you've got your hand on that glassine. Now this, we do have a lighter area. This was not from bad Photoshop. And this area gets really dark. We want this to be really dark, and that white patch will then look that much brighter. If you're working in an area and you feel like you just can't get it dark enough, it's because what's next to it in many cases is not light enough yet. Or the reverse, if the light area isn't light enough, you just cannot get a light to stand out bright enough. Make what's next to it darker. That will hype up that contrast. Okay. Now I think I want to pull a little bit of a grayish tone into this shadow. There we go. So this one is just Polychromos Payne's Gray. Just along this edge, and it's going to make that inner part of the ear look a little bit deeper. And then I'm going to take a little bit of white up here again. Let's lighten this one. That'll help the inner portion of the ear to look deeper and darker too. Okay, so we've got the nose, we've got this dark area here, and then we've got some pink right around it. So we do have a pink out. This one is Rose Carmine. Just right along the edge of his little nose. And then the rest will be the white. This is very dense fur. There is not a lot of detail there, but we do have the little hairs sticking out over the background here. Notice that they're all just slightly curved. He's also got a little eyelash, comes from about here. I'm just going over what's already there. I can see them, but I want to brighten those up. And then I'm going to switch over to the Derwent Luminance, Derwent Light Fast, sorry, white, so that this will show up even more. Let's really brighten this up. Move that pencil in the direction of the fur. Very important. And I'm not trying to make a solid area. I want some of the darker areas with that blue and the browns that I did earlier. I want some of that to show through. And I'm going to take this white, this brighter white, and get the ends of some of these little rows of fur. See how I'm hitting the outer edges, that little feathery look? Right in here. Oh, careful, I'm starting to touch my hand again to the paper, so let's slide that back over for this area. Now the polychromos here won't show up as well, so that's why I wanted to switch to a more wax-based pencil for this area. And I'm mostly getting the ends. I'm not just putting lines everywhere. Now these colors, I really like this one versus Solid White Bunny because this is actually easier to make look good. Yeah, we spent some extra time getting the detail, but it's also easier with that level of detail to make look good. It is often very hard to make something that's more simple look good because there's not a lot to hide your mistakes. Here, it gets so busy. I've got so many little hairs. It looks like it just, well, it looks good. It's easier to make that look good. Here, as we move out here, it is a lot more difficult. I mean, not a super big deal here because in contrast to this, it all works together really well. Now here we also move into rows. So see how this rounds this way and it fans out. So my brush strokes here or my pencil strokes are moving down and they fan out. Now they're moving up. Round that off. See how this turquoise color from the background is mixing in some with the white? Good. I don't want that to be solid white. This photo is overexposed. Let those background colors work in with your subject. Here where it's softer or shorter, I'll just do little circles and then move back. Actually, what color do I want to do for that? Probably the gray. Just a little bit. I'm not pushing hard because I'm not trying to make this super dark. See how that fur just keeps changing directions. One of the biggest mistakes I often see people who are newer to pencils and trying to get the detail in is they put the detail. They put just as many lines. They'll put more lines than I did, but they're not going the right direction. They're just lines for the sake of lines. That won't work. It has to be the right direction. It will look much better if it's less lines, like not even as detailed, but the right direction. Lines for the sake of lines is not usually going to be a good plan. Notice again that direction. And I will post a high resolution photo of this over on my website. So if you're following along later, you can go download that and see the way that I did my pencil strokes, if that helps. Now here where it's a little bit more soft, I'm just going to move to little circles in between that. And again, we switch out to longer strokes. Let that darker blue, don't cover it all the way. Look at those shadows now that I've got in there. Now here the fur starts getting a lot longer, and this is where the whole project starts going way faster. Let's switch over to the polychromos for those whiskers. Oh, I think he's so freaking cute. Whoops, broke the pencil. You know I sharpened it a lot if I broke polychromos. Move that paper over again. Oop, too much. Actually, I'm not even going to tape it. I'll just move it by hand, hold it in place, move it as I need to, because I'm going to be moving back and forth a bit too much for that to be practical to tape down. I think a lot of people too, they'll make 1 or 2 pencil strokes and it looks like fur, it looks great, but then they just repeat the same thing so much. Look at your photo. Promise you it will make things better. And if anybody is saying that their work comes out better when they don't look at their reference photo, that's because they're not very good at copying a reference photo. So that's why they didn't think it looked as good, because they aren't good at it. So when they compare it, it's like, oh, it doesn't look like my photo at all. Yeah, because you need to improve, but you're going to improve by looking at a reference photo, because what your brain is telling you it looks like is not what it looks like. Our brains lie to us all the time. Let me get a bit more solid in here, because it's really soft. And we need to get some of these darks a bit deeper for the shadow. This brown that I'm using is burnt umber. Burnt umber? Huh. I would have thought that was more like a raw umber. Okay. That little whisker had a dark area in it. I'm going to come back through here using my polychromos because that's softer. I'm going to go back to the luminance because that was too thin of a line for what I was doing there. You don't have that problem that often. Usually it's harder to get the thicker lines. And then we've got another row. So this one comes, it follows this, and it comes down like that. Back up, back down. Focus on the ends more than the center here, the end of that little row. And then we've got another row right below it on his jaw, like by his jaw and neck where that breaks up. But see how I'm leaving that little bit of a shadow here? I'm not filling it in all solid. And this all moves out of focus, so I don't even need to put colored pencil there. We'll leave a lot of that as the pan pastels. So here's sanguine, and I'm going to go right over some of this with the brown. Let's pull some of the darker brown in as well, and we'll also come in with the black. But notice I'm not putting anywhere near the level of detail as I did up here, because this is not where my focus is. This is where we want it to soften out. We want some detail, just not this level of detail. Okay. Look how cute he looks. Oh my gosh. This is one of my favorites so far, I think, that we've done with the Pan Pastel colored pencil mixture. I don't know, I liked them all, but this one's, maybe just because it's a bunny and I like bunnies. So this starts to soften out. We want the hint of fur, but not super defined because he's not, we don't want him to have zombie fur everywhere. Same thing here, just loose hint of that fur. We're not going to do everything. Just looking at my reference photo, where are some of those highlights? Don't invent highlights either. You can take the highlights that are in your reference photo and make them brighter. Absolutely. I almost always do that. Hype up that contrast. But don't invent new highlights that aren't there. If you do, you completely change the underlying bone and muscular structure of the subject, and it's kind of scary looking. And if you have a photo that's just terrible, sometimes like someone gives you a black lab and it's just solid black mass, go find a photo of a good lab or a good photo of a lab. There, that came out right. And just copy where those highlights are in that case, but don't just invent them, is my point. Like, you want it to be accurate. As we move out, really soft, just that hint of detail. This fur is now changing. So this spot, they move down this way a bit more. As we move here, it starts curving towards the front of his chest. Now I've got to be careful. I've obviously been touching the side of that. That is not good habits. You start smudging stuff and getting people juice on your artwork. I need to start being more careful and move this. Oh, speaking of, I ordered stickers. So those who should have gotten your postcards in March, so those would be the February ones, they always go a month after. I didn't send them yet because the $19 ones, I ran out of stickers. So I did order some, and they are an octopus that says People Ink is not archival. So I thought it was hilarious. They're actually one of my favorite stickers I've done in a while. So those will be coming soon. I apologize, those are late. But it's worth it because they're really good. Here it's just more solid. Now to soften this up, I may go back over some of this area once I get the lines in with a bit of Pan Pastels, because it'll tone down the lines that are getting a bit harsh. But I still want the hint of lines, so that may be my way to soften that. Soften, whatever. See how it's just a little bit, like it's not a lot in there. I want to make sure this white is overlapping those darker spots. Now his spots are quite a bit darker than what I've got mine here, but I really don't want to draw all of the view to the side body. I'd like the darkest darks to stay up here, so I'm not going to go any darker on him there. And if that was a pet portrait, I wouldn't make the same call. But in this case, I'm going to leave those pretty light. down in this area. It all gets cut off by the mat, so I'm not going to go crazy down there. There we go. And I want to start getting those more clumps, not just a bunch of lines. Like here is just a bunch of lines. Let's start breaking that up. That should be about it. And then I'm going to do the rest coming back on top with a bit of pan pastels. But we'll grab that. And I'm just going to pull a few highlights right over so it softens that out. See how we still are moving even with the pan pastels and those clumps and clusters. And I can use the same thing with my Spectrafix on top of all of this. The Spectrafix works with colored pencil and the pan pastels just fine. Now, if I do something with just colored pencil, I don't use a fixative over it. It doesn't need it. But it's just because of the pan pastels that I will be using that fixative. So if you're just doing colored pencil, don't even worry about that. One of the things that's so nice about Spectrafix versus a lot of other fixatives is many of those will darken the color. So like the white that I'm putting, if you put that with Spectrafix, it will oftentimes completely darken it up and you have to go right back over it once it dries. The Spectrafix, that rarely happens. Like you have to put that on really heavy to do that. So if you're just careful, you don't need to worry about it. Not like with most fixatives I've used with pastels anyway. Same thing with charcoal. It doesn't really darken it much. If it does, just go over it again, but if you use a light hand, it shouldn't be. There we go. Actually, this area looks really blue on the camera, but it's not. In person, that's much more. Okay, now to sign it, what you want to do, this is the same type of mat that I would use. So if whoever buys this, if you decide to do, to have me mat it, I will give you one that's clean. This one's dirty. But I want to hold the mat up to it. Let's actually back this up a little bit. But I always want to check where to sign it. Don't just look at this, because this is a 9x12 paper. I'm actually going to cut some of this off before I mat it. But I don't want to just sign at the bottom, because once the mat is positioned over that mat is like it's going to lose a big chunk of this. So I want to center that where I want that to be, like that, and then go ahead and sign it. Let's use brown for this. Because now that signature, look at where, if I would have signed it at the bottom, you can't really see it because it's light, but I mean, that's a big difference in the location of that. So that's why you always want to put the mat in account for that. The same thing, let's say you're doing an acrylic painting. You want to do the same thing. Don't sign at the bottom edge of that canvas, because if the customer decides to frame it, the frame will overlap just a little bit. It's not as extreme as you would have here, but you still want to leave a little bit of a space. And in this case, I'm going to frame it it would go into an 8x10 mat. So the overall size is 11x14 is the frame it would go into, but the intersection, wow, let's see if I can speak. The intersection is going to be an 8x10, so that this paper overall is too big. We want to, like, this is all being chopped, and then just a little bit down here is. So there is the finished bunny. Let me see if I can move the camera a little bit better so you get a better angle where you're looking straight at him. Oh, I am so happy with how he came out. He is so adorable.
Hey, you. Yes, you. I see all your unused art supplies over there. Oh my God, those brushes aren't even opened yet. Tragic. You keep buying new fancy materials, but you don't use them because you don't want to waste them. Stop making your art supplies sad. Sign up for art lessons for as little as $4 a month. There are over 300 painting and drawing lessons available when you sign up, and new ones every week. Patreon.com/Lachri.